Imagine you are an ancient Greek farmer. You have just been drafted into a brutal war. Your enemy? A massive, heavily armed, invading empire. You do not have modern body armor. You do not have Kevlar vests, helmets, or radios. You are basically wearing a bedsheet. Oh, and to make matters worse, bronze armor is incredibly expensive. We are talking about luxury sports car levels of expensive. Only the rich aristocrats can afford to look like walking metal tanks. So, if you are a regular guy, you head to the front lines completely unprotected. Welcome to the meat grinder. In the ancient world, battles were close, personal, and horrifically violent. Survival was not about individual heroics. If you run out there alone, swinging your sword like a Hollywood movie star, you won't last 5 seconds. Your only hope of making it back home alive lies in a piece of wood and bronze, about 3 feet wide. The Aspis shield. Weighing up to 16 pounds, this massive, bowl-shaped shield is heavy, awkward, and completely covers your left side. But there is a massive design flaw. While your left side is perfectly safe, your right side, holding your weapon, is completely exposed. So how do you fix this? You don't. The guy standing next to you does. He shifts his shield to cover your exposed right side. And then another guy covers his right side. And another. Suddenly, you aren't just a terrified farmer in a tunic anymore. You have just become a single, impenetrable scale in a massive, terrifying bronze monster. This is the legendary Greek Phalanx. It doesn't matter if you lack fancy personal armor. When hundreds of shields interlock, the entire formation becomes a walking fortress. Swords cannot find a gap. The enemy stares in horror as this solid wall of bronze and wood slowly marches toward them. In the brutal ancient world, your armor wasn't what you wore on your chest. Your armor was the brother standing to your right. So, you are locked in, shield to shield, marching forward. You feel completely invincible. But what actually happens when your bronze wall crashes into the enemy's bronze wall? Welcome to the Othismos, also known as the Great Shove. It wasn't a graceful fencing match. It was a horrifying, claustrophobic rugby scrum. If you were in the front row, you were immediately crushed between 2 walls of bronze. Because the 8 ranks of men standing directly behind you aren't just watching the show. They press their shields into your back, and they push, using their entire body weight. The guys in the back row might just be casually walking forward, but if you are in the front, you have hundreds of pounds of human meat pressing into your spine. Simply expanding your lungs to take a breath becomes a physical battle against the weight of your own army. And heaven forbid you step on a loose rock and trip. If you fall down during the Othismos, you don't get back up. You are instantly trampled into the dirt by the thousands of men pushing from behind. Add to this nightmare the physical exhaustion. Inside that heavy bronze helmet, under the Mediterranean sun, your head is baking like a potato in an oven. Sweat blinds you. The roaring of thousands of men deafens you. You can't see the enemy. You just push blindly against the shield in front of you. This meat grinder only works if absolute discipline is maintained. The moment one man panics and drops his shield to run away, a gap opens. The domino effect begins. The wall crumbles and the slaughter begins. For centuries, this was the terrifying peak of warfare. Until a one-eyed king from Macedonia looked at it and thought, I can make this crazier. King Philip II of Macedonia, father of Alexander the Great, realized traditional phalanx had a major range problem. The standard Greek spear, the dory, was about 8 feet long. Philip thought, that is just too short. So, he invented the Sarissa, a pike so ridiculously long, it almost looked like a joke. Measuring between 13 and 20 feet in length, the Sarissa was more than double the size of a standard enemy spear. Made from dense cornel wood and tipped with a heavy iron point, It weighed up to 14 pounds. It was so heavy and awkward that you couldn't possibly hold it with just one hand while carrying a giant shield. This meant the massive, heavy Aspis shield had to go. It was replaced by a much smaller shield, strapped over the shoulder, freeing up both hands to control the massive pike. Behold, the Macedonian Phalanx. When Philip's newly reformed soldiers formed the block, it was no longer just a shield wall. The first 5 rows of men would lower their sarissas perfectly horizontal. Any enemy trying to attack the front row had to somehow get past 5 separate spear points before they could even get close enough to swing their own short sword. It was mathematically impossible. And what about the men in the back rows? They held their massive pikes at an upward angle. This created a dense forest of wood that actually deflected incoming enemy arrows. It was a built-in anti-missile system. Philip had turned his army into an invincible, giant bronze porcupine. But every monster has a weak spot. To truly understand this ancient meat grinder, you have to look at its core engine, a unit called the syntagma. This was a tightly packed block of exactly 256 men, 16 across and 16 deep. The guys in the very front row were the veterans. They were the most experienced, the best armored, and got paid the most. And the guy at the very back of the line? His job was to literally push everyone forward and make sure no one ran away. To make this work, they had to march in absolute perfect synchronization, like a giant, multi-legged bronze robot. Because if just one guy stepped on his buddy's heel, the entire block would trip and fall like a bunch of metal dominoes. But when they didn't trip, this formation didn't just enemy. It rolled over them like a spiked steamroller. The combined weight and forward momentum of 256 men pushing as a single unit created a kinetic force that could literally snap enemy shields in half and physically push an entire army backwards. And then there was the psychological terror. Imagine the sound. You are the enemy, standing there, waiting. You hear a slow, rhythmic thumping of thousands of boots, hidden behind an impenetrable, towering wall of dust. Now, imagine putting dozens of these 256-man syntagmas side by side, linking them together against traditional, loosely organized armies. The full Macedonian Phalanx was essentially an ancient lawnmower going through tall grass. It was virtually unstoppable from the front. If you stood in its way, you simply died. But that was the catch. You had to stand directly in front of it. What if you just walked around it? Because all those 20-foot pikes are pointing forward. If an enemy attacks the flank, the men on the edge are completely defenseless. You can't just quickly turn around to fight them. Try swinging a 20-foot pole in a tight crowd. You'll just hit your own friends. To turn the entire phalanx to face a threat on the side took an incredibly long time. They maneuvered like a broken cruise ship. If an agile enemy managed to hit the flanks, or worse, the rear, the formation would instantly collapse into pure slaughter. But there was a second, even bigger Achilles heel: the terrain. The phalanx was a bulldozer, but a bulldozer that only works on a perfectly flat parking lot. If the battlefield had hills, trees, or a tiny ditch, some soldiers step down into the ditch. Others walk over the rocks. The perfect straight line of shields immediately breaks apart. Gaps appear in the uncrackable armor. And the Romans? The Romans loved gaps. At the Battle of Pydna, the highly flexible Roman legions saw the phalanx breaking over rough terrain. Roman soldiers didn't fight the wall. With their large shields and short swords, they simply squeezed right into the cracks. Once inside the formation, the 20-foot Sarissa is completely useless. It's like trying to use a sniper rifle in a phone booth. The Macedonians had to drop their pikes and draw their secondary weapon, the xiphos, which was essentially a tiny butter knife. It was a massacre. The invincible meat grinder was hacked to pieces from the inside out. The phalanx was not a flexible weapon. It was an anvil, a heavy, slow, unbreakable wall meant to pin the enemy in place. The true genius of the Macedonian army wasn't just the phalanx. It was realizing the phalanx didn't need to kill everyone, it just needed to hold them in place. The phalanx was an immovable wall that pinned the enemy army down. While the enemy was desperately trying not to get skewered from the front, Alexander's elite cavalry would loop around the sides. These were the companion cavalry, the ancient world's premier heavy strike force, made up of Macedonian nobility. Unlike the square blocks of the infantry, they rode in a wedge formation, shaped exactly like a triangle, designed to act like an axe splitting a log. It penetrates a single weak point and bursts the enemy line wide open. Imagine you are a Persian soldier. In front of you is a wall of 20-foot spears pushing you backward. And when you look over your shoulder, 2,000 heavy cavalrymen are charging directly at your undefended rear. This is the hammer and anvil. The cavalry acts as the hammer, violently smashing the enemy right into the unyielding spears of the phalanx. It was instant, absolute destruction. And the craziest part? Alexander didn't direct this from a safe tent on a hill. He was physically at the very tip of the wedge. He was constantly in the thick of the bloodiest fighting and nearly got himself killed multiple times doing this. But it worked. This deadly combination of the immovable anvil and the crushing hammer allowed a small Greek kingdom to conquer the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen, reaching all the way to India. But behind the glory of the generals, what was it actually like for the regular guys holding the anvil? Let's talk about ancient PTSD. Unlike today, there were no therapists or trauma centers for ancient warriors. You were expected to just deal with it. Let's start with the noise. The clashing of thousands of bronze shields and iron weapons created a deafening roar. Inside a bronze helmet, that sound echoed and amplified. Historians estimate it easily surpassed 100 decibels. Then there is the claustrophobia. The classic Corinthian helmet offered great protection, but terrible visibility. Your entire world was reduced to a tiny, shaking rectangle. All you could see were the tips of enemy spears moving toward your face. And the smell. Thousands of sweating men packed together under the hot sun, terrified and, well, sometimes losing control of their bodily functions. If the man standing next to you was killed, you had no time to mourn. You couldn't stop to help him. The men behind you were still pushing. You simply had to step over his body and close the gap. So how did ordinary men not lose their minds before a battle? They used the oldest trick in the book: liquid courage. Greek and Macedonian armies often drank copious amounts of undiluted wine right before locking shields. Being slightly drunk numbed the terror. But not everyone relied on booze. The Spartans had a different method: extreme brainwashing from childhood. Through the agoge training system, they were taught to fear their commanding officers and the shame of cowardice much more than they feared the enemy. And to keep everyone moving in that perfect, terrifying synchronization, they used music. Specifically, the aulos. This shrill, piercing double flute played a steady, hypnotic beat. It put the men into a trance-like state, turning them into mindless gears of the war machine. They fought, they suffered, and they conquered. But eventually, even the phalanx was forced into extinction, leaving behind a legacy that changed history. The phalanx eventually met its match against the Roman Republic. The Romans didn't fight in giant, rigid blocks. They fought in a flexible checkerboard formation. Compared to the agile Romans, the phalanx was like a dinosaur trying to dance. Eventually, the Sarissa pike was retired, placed into the Museum of Military History as tactics evolved. But the core idea of a massive wall of pikes didn't die. It would be resurrected centuries later by medieval Swiss pikemen, because the ancient Greeks understood a fundamental truth about human survival. A single man on a battlefield is weak. He can be broken easily. But a tightly packed bundle, bundle is virtually indestructible. The phalanx wasn't just a military tactic. It was the ultimate survival mechanism for the ancient soldier. And if you want to survive the algorithm and learn more about how ancient empires actually worked, hit that subscribe button. Do it for the phalanx. Don't forget to ring the bell so you don't miss our next story. Next time on Greek Empire Stories. How did Alexander survive the deadliest desert in the world without a map? Until then, keep your shields up. Thanks for watching.